Kum learning a block Gemara. We are up to Daf Yud Beis on the bottom of the page of Moed Katan. So our Mishnah said we make allowances that you can go do things to protect your assets, even though it involves a slight ticha, but you shouldn't deliberately delay it until Chalamoid because you have then spare time. And if you did, it says in the Mishnah Yeveda they should be lost. Now, when we penalize you, they shouldn't have any benefit from it. Okay, says the Gemara. Interesting question. Boye Menei Rabbi Yirmiyah asked a very interesting question from Rabbi Zeda. What happens if Kivan Melachte b'Moed? Okay, you deliberately waited to Chol Moed. Okay, so the Mishnah says we penalize you, that you evaded, you lose whatever you did. But what happened was Vames, and he died. We penalize the children afterwards. And there's two different ways of how they're showing learning Gemara's question. One way is that they're showing learning Gemara's question here is, that is, okay, that now the son did it on Chalamoid. Will we penalize the son because his father delayed it until Yom Tov? And just like the father had been alive, he would have lost out. So the son also loses out. We take it away from him. The other way of learning is, the father, Lepoil, should have done it before Yom Tov. He didn't. And, normally we'd penalize him. But the son, is he permitted L'chatchila to do it on Chalamoid because he wasn't around before? Is he like an honest? Or do we say that he takes over, he's in his father's shoes, and therefore he's L'chatchila not allowed to go ahead and do it on Chalamoid? Okay, says the Gemara, Im Tim Tzelem, Rabbi Yirmiyah continues. If you want to draw comparisons to other things, we have similar shilas. For example, Tzoram Oizen B'chayr. Then by a b'chayr is if it has a mum, then you're allowed to eat it the way it is. Otherwise, it's kachim. You can't do anything with it. So what happened? You nick the ear of this b'chayr in order to turn it and make it a balmum, that you should be able to benefit from it, and I'll do that because the Torah clearly says that you're not allowed to inflict a mum. And if you did, the Rabbanan counsel you that you shouldn't have any benefit from that animal. So what happened was the father did that, and then he died. Konsu b'noi achav. There the din is that the child cannot, also the son, cannot benefit from this particular b'chor because so therefore you can say the same thing over here. So, and I'll say you cannot draw any parallels with them. That involves an Isa deraisa. That's an Isa deraisa. Over here, we're talking about an Isa derabanan, working on Chalamoid, and therefore, maybe we don't penalize. Now, even though I told you there are a number of shittas that hold that not working in Chalamoid is Mahatayra, but but over here, something that you're allowed to do in Chalamoid. Here, what you did was we told you not to delay the Chalamoid. That definitely is midrabanan. No, if the Torah allows you to do this particular thing in Chalamoid, had you chanced in a Chalamoid. But here the issue was that the father delayed it deliberately in Chalamoid. That definitely is only Yisra Rabbanah. So maybe we don't penalize the son. Or another example, you give them two lines at the top. Or Intim Chalem, what happened in the following case? You sold your Eved Knani. Once you buy an Eved Knani, you have to make it, you turn him into a ger, you convert him into a yid, has all the laws of a woman, and if he doesn't want to become a yid, then you have to let him go. So now he's a yid. And then you sell him to a goy, which means that he will not be able to continue behaving like a yid. You're not allowed to. And then the maze. And then, so therefore, the dinder is that this Eved, the Chachamim penalize him, that this Eved runs away from his new master, that no Yid can go ahead and take him back and make him into an Eved. Now, what happens if this guy, because we penalize you for selling him to a guy. Now, what happens if this guy dies? We continue to the knas to his children as well. So again, I can say there's much more stringent. Every day that he's living in the Goyish master, he cannot perform his mitzvahs. So it's an ongoing problem. Over here, once you did it, you did it. So the question, what's the question? So the question is as follows. When the Chachamim penalize, did they penalize the person or they penalize the object? Gavra Konesh Rabbanan v'Halesa, did they penalize the person for his behavior, but he passed on? But why should it pass on to the son? It's the money that Rabbanan counts in v'Ha'isa, and that does exist. We have a similar Gemara in Gittin of Malach. There's also the whole Shaila by Chometz. Interesting machlekes that Yehuda long after in Kutuzachrin, where if a person dies on Pesach and had chametz in his house, do his kids inherit his chametz? And have all the Avedas that come with it. It's a little bit similar to this, and they use the Gemara in Gittin, the Malach, to prove one way or another. So the question is, what the penalty is levied on the person or against the object? If it's the object, it doesn't matter if the person died, it's still penalized. If it's the person, he's no longer here. Amalei, he said to him, to the Surah, Al answer says, Sada, a field, so you removed all the twigs and everything else from the field. B'shvius, the Shmita, Tizla, Matzoi, Shvius. You're allowed to plant straight away Matzoi. Shvius, there's no reason to penalize anybody, he didn't really much wrong. But what about the taiva? What about you fertilize the field? You took a bunch of fertilizer on the back of wagons and you go ahead and dropped it all over the field, which you shouldn't have, because now you're working to plant on Shmita in the Shmita year, or in the daida, or for example, that you forced the animals to walk throughout the entire field to pass their fertilizer all over the field. These are all asim that rabbanon. You are working with the land. These are Yisur Rabbanon. And here it says, like Tizra l'mitzvah shvis. You're not going to plant mitzvah shvis. Because we penalize the land because you should have done it. Okay, all we know from here is that there's a penalty, but we don't know if the penalty is on the person or on the land. However, the Beit Hanina went along and he added, and he said, Naktinan, the rule is, hey, Tiba, let's say he did all this, V'meis, and he died, B'nois, or his son, let's say he died, the son is permitted to plant this field, and so the following year. In other words, clearly for me, we level the penalty against the person, not against the object. Alma, we penalize the person and not the object. I would say the same thing here. I would venture to say, we only penalize the person and not the object, so therefore comes Chalamayit. The child can go ahead and do whatever had to be done, or he can benefit from what was done. We also have another rule similarly. We're going to have a Margit in a concept where if you commit, we know the Gemara Baba Kama that if you cause damage to somebody, you have to pay, reimburse the person for the damages. It's this week's parsha. But what about your animals cause damage or other things cause damage? But what about, let's say, a hezek she'ena nicker? You take a sheretz, you take, let's say, one of the 8 shrots, one of the things that generate tumah, and you place it on your friend's taharis, on his kosher stuff, and it basically ruins it all. But it's not a tangible damage. You can't see it, you can't detect it. Do you have to pay or not? If chayiv or not. So even though Rav says that you're not chayiv, but the Rabboni came along and constantly, because we don't want every person to go ahead, I don't like you, I'll take revenge, I'll go and cause you damage in a manner of hezek she'ein nikra. Similarly, a kohen, for example, who's mefagel, a kohen who ruins your carbon by having wrong thoughts in mind, so it's a hezek she'ein nikra. So as about Naktin, and the rule is timei taharos. If you went ahead and you contaminated somebody's tahara, somebody's food items that are Torah pure, the mace, and then he died, we will not pass on that penalty to the children. My time. Why is that? Remember, the damage is not really called the damage. The Rabban only penalized this person, but not to his children. Following on what we just said before, that the penalty is against the person, not against the object itself. Mishnah. Ein loichin botim va'avadim ubehema. You want to make outright purchases, you shouldn't buy houses or slaves or animals. Ella l'tzeidach hamoed. Only if you need it now for the Yom Tov itself. Oi, but here we have another option. L'tzeidach hamoichet. The person who's selling it needs the money. It's the Yiddish person who needs the money, so therefore you're helping him out. She'ein lo ma'yechel, doesn't have what to eat. Now, why we're adding she'ein lo ma'yechel? We just said the moicha needs the money, and obviously needs the money. What does it mean, she'ein lo ma'yechel? We'll see in the Gemara. Taisus is an opinion that even though we're giving 3 examples, they're houses, slaves, and animals, which are all, I guess, items that are quite public knowledge. It never takes the whole dinal buy anything on Chalamoid, unless it's you need it now for Yom Tov Chalamoid, and so on. It takes a brings a proof from the Gemara Sumsi about selling fruits on Yom Tov and so on. And so, what's the chiddush? Why Mishnah going to highlight these things? The chiddush in the Mishnah is the leniency. That even though these things are so prominent and everybody can see, nevertheless, if you need it for Yom Tov, we'll allow you to do it. And then later on by fruits, we say you should do, but if you buy these things, you should buy discreetly. One wonders whether these things also have to be tried. You have to try to do them discreetly or not. Other Rishonim totally disagree. Other Rishonim hold everything else you can buy and sell anything you want in Chol Hamoed. If there's a sale and you can buy. Doesn't matter if it's for Yom Tov or not for Yom Tov. These three things we're limited on these three things because it's public. It's in the public arena, and therefore it's not in the spirit of Yom Tov, and everybody sees. And it's not just you're buying it, but everybody now sort of gets caught up in this particular activity, and therefore the Mishnah says don't do that unless you need it for Yom Tov. Says the Gemara. What about schar pu'ula? What about a worker? You told me that you're allowed to vendors allowed to sell things because if they need it. What about can you go to work in Chol Hamoed? You need the wages. He doesn't have what to eat. What's the din? When it says he doesn't have what to eat, yesterday we discussed that you could always buy, but you're talking about working in your own field, you want to have your own. Here, is a discussion whether it means between Ritva and others, whether it means literally you have nothing to eat, so therefore you have to go to work, or it means, of course, you can afford to eat, but you want to have a nicer meal. You want to have beef. You want to have more expensive food. You have nice wines, nice mashke, and that's called ein la mayech. So basically, every person who works needs the money in order to be able to live a normal lifestyle, or a bit more than normal, a bit more lavish. So can't you? Amalei. So we have an interesting discussion here. Tinyana, we learned, it says in the Mishnah, you're allowed to sell. You're allowed to buy these things if the vendor needs the money, and then the Mishnah says if he doesn't have what to eat. What do you have to add that for? Once you told us he's allowed to sell it for the vendor if he needs it, that's enough. My love, the Mishnah is coming to say, or a worker who needs the wages is allowed to go to work at Chol Hamoed. Amalei said to him, that's no proof. Maybe the Mishnah, when the Mishnah says the Moicha needs it, the Mishnah says, what do I mean the Moicha needs it? Where he needs the money. That's what it means. He doesn't have what to eat. But really, when it comes to an employee, it might be very different. We don't know. Why should an employee be different? As I guess we can argue in practically a vendor, you sell it for a minute and it's over. An employee is working the entire Chol Hamoed or the entire day. And therefore, it's more than just a few minutes. It's completely distracting, and you're working on it for a long time. So Eisel asks a question, Abaye asks a question, or actually maybe it should be Toshma. Abaye wants to answer. He wants to resolve it. It says, Ein Koisvi, we'll see later on. It says you shouldn't write you shouldn't write formal loan documents of Chol Hamoed. But if you don't trust the person who's borrowing the money, doesn't have what to eat, then you may write it. In other words, if the Sefer needs the money, you can always commission the Sefer to write it for you in Chol Hamoed. I would have to add that you already said I don't trust him, so you gave a good reason. You already said that the borrower I don't trust, so therefore I want to write a document. So therefore, what do you have to say? He doesn't have what to eat. My love, I want to tell you that you need. I have to tell you that the employee, for example, the Sefer, he needs money. Shmami, no, here's a conclusive proof that a person is allowed to go to work if they full time during Chol Hamoed if they need the money. Says the Gemara. So, for example, who's the employee here? The scribe, not the lender, not the borrower. She'elam hayech is referring to the scribe. Let's say you trust the borrower, but the scribe needs a panasa, and you have a good heart, so you want to help the guy out. So therefore, you're allowed to commission on Chol Hamoed to write the shtar so he can get paid. So from here you learn out that an employee is allowed to get paid. Says we have a problem with that. I have a question with that. So you want to say employee allowed to get paid? It says the Chachamim say Sholish. There the Gemara Pesach talks about Erev Pesach. Erev Pesach also you're not allowed to work. So we're going to compare Erev Pesach to Chol Hamoed. As at this moment we think, but if Sheish think they equate the two. They're exactly the same dinim that applies to both of them. Says the Gemara. Three trades that we permit on Erev Pesach. Ad Chatzos until noon. Hachayotin, the tailors, Hasafali, the barbers, Vakois, and the launders. Hachayotin, why do we allow the tailors to tailor Erev Pesach in the morning? Since we learned before that not a professional but an amateur can sew on Chol Hamoed, since there's a heter, a license to do Chol Hamoed, even though it's limited to certain circumstances, Erev Pesach is permitted to everybody. Number one, hasafarin bahakaifsin, why they permitted the barbers and the launderers. Can have bombed in a yam. We're going to later on. If somebody comes from overseas and he arrives Chalamoid, or right before Yom no time before Yom like an honest. He was released from prison on Chalamoid. These people can't take a haircut and can go bathe in Chalamoid or launder in Chalamoid. So what do we see from here? There is a license to, there is sometimes permission to do these activities on Chalamoid. So anything which is permitted on Chalamoid, we're going to be a bit more relaxed in Erev Pesach, and we're going to completely allow it without even having these special circumstances. Now, that's what the Mishnah there says. Comes on and asks, if you're going to tell me that's a harpool, that sometimes they're allowed to work in Chalamoid when you're desperate for the money, or you need the money. So according to that, your logic, we're a bit more relaxed at a Pesach, that anybody should be able to work in a Pesach. Because anything which has there's a permission during Chalamoid, even though it's limited circumstances, when it comes to Pesach, it's open slather. So why dafka these three professions? Any worker should be able to work at a Pesach. So he says, if he's like that, should permit everything. You allow sometimes employees they don't have to eat. That's what Rav Sheich is, because he wanted to compare Chol HaMoed at a Pesach, and the Pesach is slightly more relaxed. So we're going to prove that Erev Pesach and Chalamoid are two different things. First comes along the Papa, and then Avina. Masker Papa is the question. Let me ask, according to your logic, Binyan Lishtre, you should go ahead and be allowed to build buildings Chalamoid. Why? Because we have a Shekain Koisel. We learned before. There's a circumstance. A Koisel Hagoyish, there's a wall that is falling into the Rishus Harabim. So he said, you're allowed to demolish the wall and build it accordingly, because it's a kana. And once under certain circumstances you're permitted to build a wall, then according to your Pesach, you should build a house completely. Mask going to be another question. I mean, I have to go to you. Let's say a scribe, lishtri, should be permitted to write whatever he wants at a Pesach. Shekain koisen kiddushin noshim gitim shem. There's certain things you're allowed to write on Chalamoid, as we'll see later on. You're allowed to write kiddushin, engagement, or a divorce, or a receipt. According to you, then you should be able to write everything. So why are we limiting only to these three professions? They should include also a scribe. They should include also building construction workers. El Ravashi. So Ravashi wants to say that you completely, blurred the lines when there's nothing to do with each other. Ravashi comes along and says, you're comparing Chalamoid to Erev Pesach. Two different reasons for the prohibition of working. Moed, why can't you work on Chalamoid? The main problem is that if it's strenuous, you become so preoccupied, you're distracted, and you're forgetting about Chalamoid. When there's a loss, the Rabbanan will lenient. And I guess those depends on how much effort is involved as well. So everything is with a balance. But also the basis for the Isser of the 14th day is Mishum Tzorech Yom Tov. That why we want you to be stand and prepare for Yom Tov. Me did the Tzorech on the Shorabon, anything which is necessary for Yom Tov permitted me, but things which are not necessary, like a scribe, like building a house, or as just a general employee, cannot work. It's only those things that we said you need to take a haircut, that you need to sew something, you need to launder. These are things that you need for Yom Tov, because the prohibition of Erev Pesach is we want you to do things for Yom Tov. Taisus brings down in Makar Shanagu and Psachim that the reason for the Isser Erev Pesach is because whenever you bring a carbon for you, it's a Yom Tov. Brings you to Shalmi. It's a Yom Tov, and if you're not work Erev Pesach after Chatzos, maybe it's even Mahatayra, because like our Yom Tov. Okay, here we're talking about in the morning. Talking about it further. Mishnah, the next Mishnah, we don't want you to move things from one house to another house because again it involves tircha, but you're allowed to move things into your courtyard. Right now we're thinking from somebody else's house into your courtyard, so it seems to be contradictory. Then we'll discuss that. Next part of the Mishnah is you should bring home, let's say, certain things that you had a tradesman, some specialist to go ahead and do something for you. You're not bringing it home with your chalamayit. However, if you are concerned that it'll get stolen or so on, then bring it to the closest courtyard where you think it's that you can trust that it will remain there. So you don't have to bring it all the way home. Says, but first of all, I don't understand the contradiction. You start off saying that you're not move from one house to another house, and then you tell me you're allowed to move from my house to a courtyard. What's going on here? I'm going to buy you. Misunderstood. When we say you're allowed to move into a courtyard, not from somebody else's house, from your own house, which is right next to the courtyard, you're allowed to. Say for us, a house in your very same courtyard. I'll bring home kalim from the tradesman. I'm gonna pop a button or other. When we were kids, Rav used to ask us questions. And one of the questions was, we learned here it says, I'll bring in a kalim home for his woman. But meanwhile, there's a question we learned, my lichin umayvin kalim. It says somewhere else that you are allowed to bring, and you're allowed to bring to the woman, to the professional, and you're allowed to take her home. Even though you don't need it for Yom Tov or Chalamoid. We answered him. One answer we gave him was here where it says that you're allowed to talk about Erev Pesach, and here it says that you're not allowed to is talking about Chalamoid. Chalamoid, we're worried about bother. It's a bother, and there's no Erev Pesach. Another answer we gave was if you trust the tradesman, then you're not allowed to bring it home, which is what our mission says. But if you don't trust the tradesman, then you are permitted to bring it home. Says the Gemara, but Tanya, I'll bring you a brayso to prove it. It says, you're allowed to bring home kalim from the house of the tradesman. You're going somebody built a jug for you, or the guy built a beautiful cup for you, a glass for you. I'll bring home the wool from the dyer. Nor can you bring home kalim, completed works from the house of the craftsman. But if the craftsman, let's say, he needs the money, he needs to get paid, then you pay him. But still, you leave the merchandise there. But now you're a bit scared, maybe you paid him, and merchandise there, when you come after Yom Tov, he might say, you never paid me. You don't trust him, then bring it, put it in the house, the closest house that you trust next to the tradesman. So we don't trust anybody around there because it might get stolen. Then bring it home, but discreetly. So therefore, we see clearly from here that when can you bring home from a tradesman? Well, you don't trust them. But if you do trust them, you leave it there. Says the Gemara, Tiratz the Mevian. You only the second answer is a good answer regarding taking from the tradesman's house and bringing it to your house because you don't trust them. But the first, it says in this second brayso that Rabbi asked us from, it says Mevian or Melich, you're allowed to bring to him. If you don't trust him, why you bring it to him? If you do trust him, why does he give a license to bring to him? And our mission says you're not allowed to take back, even though surely you're not allowed to bring to him. It's clear that we have to go back to the first answer. That here's talking about Erev Pesach, then you are permitted, and our mission talking about Chalamoid, you're not allowed to. Next Mishnah, mechafin is like tziyas. You have cut figs which you leave out there in the field to dry. You're allowed to cover them over with straw. Abiyah says, "Av ma'avin also you're allowed to be ma'avin to make a fig." As the Gemara will explain the difference between mechafin and ma'avin. It says here those people, the vendors that sell fruits, clothes, kalim, and all kinds of other kalim utensils. Moichim can continue selling an chalamai, but betzina should be done discreetly. Let's say the chalamai. Two conditions. First of all, it should be for Yom Tov. The second of all, it should be done discreetly. I told you, Tess already asked, what about those three things in the Mishnah which we allow you to? If it's chalamai, does it have to be done discreetly as well or not? Then the Mishnah continues. Hatzayodi in the trappers had the shushas. We'll see later the shushas. Those people who crush grains, and the hagrusas were those people who crush beans. Oisin bitzina. So they're allowed to do that if you need it for Yom Tov or Chalamoid, but it should be done discreetly, because otherwise people will right away think that you're buying it for long term and you're preparing now for after Yom Tov. And see how worried we are about what people's thoughts are, what people's interpretation of my behavior. Rabbi says, "Hein hichmiru al atzor." He says that they were machmir. Now, what exactly Rabbi is trying to say? He's trying to say that this whole thing is a chumrah. Don't worry about it, or just a chumrah, but it's not a pialacha. Or he's saying that even though the Mishnah says you can do these things discreetly, I'm telling you that they were machmir. They wouldn't even do it discreetly. We'll see in the Gemara soon. So first, please, both of them, one of them says, "What's the difference between mechafin and ma'avin?" One of them says mechafin means aklushe, to put a cover on it, but very thin. And ma'avin means asmuchid, make a very thick cover. Another one says mechafin means you cover it bein aklushe, bein asmuchid. I don't care if it's thin or it's thick. Ma'avin, what's ma'avin? Oisin can mean carry. That you can gather them all together, make them like a big pile, and first bring all the fruits together. By doing all that, bring all the figs together. You're making a big pile, then it's much easier to place a cover on it. So it's much more than just placing a cover, you're working with the figs themselves. Tanya, we actually learned ma'avin oisin can mean carry. You clearly said that's what it means. They paid as kalim, they can continue buying and selling on chalamai, but it should be done discreetly. And it's a two conditions, tzarech hamoed and discreetly. It's and then Rabbi Yossi says, "Hein hichmiru al atzma." What did Rabbi Yossi mean to say that? Did he mean to have the cloud? Was he being machmer? That even though technically allowed to do it with tzarech hamoed and discreetly, but they decided to be machmer, not do it at all. Or maybe he's being lenient. The habit of the betzina, or maybe this whole idea of doing it discreetly is only a chumrah. Technically, it could be done openly, and they were machmer. This whole business of doing it discreetly is a chumrah. Crossra coming here. Moichrei peides, those who sell fruits, clothes, kalim and utensils, moichrin betzina l'tzedech hamoed. They sell it discreetly l'tzedech hamoed for the sake of Yom Tov. Right? They can sell whatever they want if it's for the benefit of Yom Tov. Be discreet. Rabbi Yossi says in the Brisa, says Tagre Tveria, the merchant of Tveria, Hein Ichmiru alas, what they were machmer, Shalayim moichrin kol iker. The chumrah is that they would, even discreetly, even though the tzarech hamoed, they would not sell fruits, clothes, or utensils. So we see clearly from Rabbi Yossi, when he says machmer, it means that he was more machmer than the Mishnah. They wouldn't do it at all. Again, we have the same argument, same principle. Those people who trap animals and birds with dog and fish, you need it for Yom Tov, so they would still do it, but they did it discreetly. The people of Aku, the trappers, they wouldn't do it at all. Again, you see the idea that he's machmer, they wouldn't do it at all. The shushay chilka, those people who crushed chilka targets with tisni, that crushed grains. We'll see the three ways of crushing grains. Depends to what size, how fine it is. They would crush them discreetly. Rabbi Yossi says the shushay tzepoida, those people who used to crush in tzepoida, and they used to, when you crush the tfur, you break it down into 2 parts, 3 parts, we'll see how many parts, and then they would soak in the water. They wouldn't do it at all. Now, why exactly we have to repeat 3 times the same idea in each one? The same principle, really, I'm not sure. Otherwise, labaya. Chilka, what's chilka? Taking a grain and dividing it in half. Chadul tarti, 1 into 2. Tarti says chadul tlas, 1 into 3. In my brachas, Rashi explains the source of these words, how it says 2 or 3. And tisne is chadul arba, 1 into 4. Ravdima came along and said he doesn't think that it means breaking it down 1, 2, 3. It means kunza. It means basically spelt, and spelt the whole spelt. Didn't break it down. The whole spelt they would take it, and Tisney is taking whole spelt and putting in the water. Makes ask a question. It says chilka targets with tisney. These things we divide in half or into the way we learned the first pshat, into 3 parts or 4 parts. They're always receptive to tumah because you made them wet, and it's called a muchshel kabel. In order for food to become tummy, it has to first become wet. So you prepared it to be able to be makabel tumah. And so, and with the Gemara that talks about certain things are not automatically makabel tumah because they generally didn't place it in water. We talked about their flour, in the difference between the cities and the villages. In the cities they took care of the fine flour, they made it wet. But in the villages they didn't, because they didn't put it in water. Because they weren't so particular about fine flour, make sure that everything is perfect and boilable water and so on. So therefore theirs was Torah. So there it says, but chilka is always tamei, regardless whether it's in a large city metropolis or whether it's in a tiny village. Why? Because you have to, when you break in half, you have to put it into water, and therefore they're always receptive to makabel tumah. So, to ask the questions. That even tisney means to form shemach. That's why they're talking about discussion, because you base them in water. Because you're saying spelt, it's whole piece of swell, spelt. Even put in the water, it's with this husk. So therefore, it itself, the seed itself, isn't the grain itself. It's not makabel tumah. I might make b'chol makom. Why is it not discussion? You never get prepared it. So it's like you're going to mikvah and it's whole, but you still remove this husk. So therefore, when you put it in the water, it became receptive to makabel tumah. If you wouldn't have placed it in water, it wouldn't really pure. Why do you call this chilka? The shokal. So why do we? Could you say it's all talking about spelt? Why do we call it chilka? The shokal. When you take away the peel, chilkeyu, it becomes smooth. Notice that's a question. It says when we talk about people making a dorim, when they say they won't do something, it's not so much what the Torah, how the Torah classifies, is more how people, when people say things, what was their reference to? We need to understand the vernacular of people. So it says here, If somebody makes a neder, he will not eat any grains. Now, we generally in halacha say only 5 kinds of grains. Rice doesn't come under dogon, you don't wash for rice and so on. Only 5 kinds of grains. But when people speak, they speak more. Also, after pull mitzvah, take for example, we don't eat corn on Pesach because it's called corn. It's like a dogon, meaning digun, and therefore we don't eat it just because of the name. It's not kidneys or anything else, it's just because of the name. Somebody says, I will not have any dogon. Also, he is not allowed to eat even the Egyptian bean, yavish if it's dry. But he's permitted belach if it's moist. Is permitted in rice because they're not dogon. But the Egyptian bean, people used to call it a dogon because I guess it fills you. They used to call it a dogon. And therefore, if you make a neder, you won't eat from the dogon. It includes also the Egyptian bean. But then it says that you are allowed to eat rice and you're allowed to eat chilka, targis, v'tisna, because they're not grains. Now, what it did was you took these beans and you broke them up. Okay, shop it. The nafkumah is dogon. You took whatever it is and you divided it into these parts. It's no longer considered dogon. Elamanam kunz was a whole spelt. Why isn't it dogon? Why, if you make a ned, you say permitted to have it dogon al you? It is real. It is mamish dogon. Kasha. Here we have a problem. Ravuna allow these people who sell, these peddlers who sell, spice merchants, if you're chayv, should allowed to go in the marketplace and allowed to sell in public. Because people bought in small quantities, and therefore they it's mainly for Yom Tov. Kind of a question we learned somewhere else that has to be discreet. It says as follows: it says, Chanus, if the store is psucha l'stav, the store is not open to the shusarab, but to a side to where the benches are, then peseach v'noel kedarka, you can open and close the way you want. Since you're not open to the public, on the public in the public street, so therefore it's pretty discreet. But the doorway is open to a public place. Keep one door closed, one door open, so people realize that you're sort of half open, only for those people who need things for Yom Tov or Chal. But the Erev Yom Tov, the last day of Chal Moed, before the last days of Yom Tov, Moitzi, you take out take out all your wares and beautify the city and so on, so that they can buy for the last day of Yom Tov and make it as nice as possible. She covered Yom Tov Acher in order to beautify and enhance the last day of Yom Tov. So we see, the last day of Yom Tov, we go out of our way to make it really special. So what do we see from here? They covered Yom Tov Acher. When can you have a display? When can you make it public? Only because of the last day of Yom Tov. But your if they covered Yom Tov, but if not for the last day of Yom Tov, so how can you allow these spice merchants to sell? Like cash is not a problem. When it comes to fruits and vegetables that have some longevity, we're scared that you're shopping now, not just for the last days or for Chol Hamoed and the last day, that you're shopping for the next 2-3 weeks. So therefore, we need to be done discreetly. But when it comes to spices, some of the spices, Rashi says, interesting, that kruv, cabbage, is a spice. They used to use cabbage as a spice, as a flavor, and doesn't have a long shelf life. So therefore, everyone knows you're buying it only to be used the next day or two. There's no chshad. Then you can do it open in the public. Had naloch mi shahafach, and we will continue tomorrow, the third pedic of Moed Katan.